Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 5th of January 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. And joining me today via video link is David Scott. Welcome to the programme, David.
Hello, Mike. Good to be here.
Well, let's get straight on. Quite a bit to cover here. And we're going to start off with productivity, David. And the question is, what is productivity? This is what the Treasury was tweeting out this morning. This is a little video clip from the autumn budget. But here we've got productivity is all about the economy growing. It's all about higher wages. It's all about investing in skills, which they're not doing. It's all about investing in infrastructure, which they're not doing. So it's all good stuff. And why are we interested in this today? Well, because the Office for National Statistics has released the latest figures on productivity in the UK. Let's have a look at the main headlines. The Guardian here, UK productivity jumps at fastest rate for 6 years. We've got Reuters. UK productivity growth hits 6-year high after weakest decade since 1820s. So undoubtedly, David, you're feeling a lot better having seen those two headlines.
Well, it's amazing what a few short-term data points will do for the political spin. Does less for the economy, but at least they're talking about the right thing, because productivity is key, and the problem is malinvestment wrecks the economy.
Well, let's just look at the true picture then, because this is the graph from the Office for National Statistics. And do you see this massive jump in this past quarter?
I'm toiling. I see the malinvestment wrecking the economy that coincides with zero interest rate policy, and that rather suggests that you put money into things and businesses and ventures that wouldn't otherwise be fundable, and that's malinvestment. So I see that happening. The huge leap? No, I don't see the great leap forward at all.
So just for people that are listening rather than watching, we've got a graph on screen at the moment which basically shows that since 2008, productivity has been flat. It quite kindly shows the trend, or where productivity should be if the trend had continued at the rate that it was going for the previous, I guess, couple of decades. But and we've got a huge gap now in between the two. This has been a subject which the mainstream press has found it very difficult to get to grips with over the last number of months, David. They've been talking about the productivity crisis. But as Reuters hinted at here, let's just put an Office for National Statistics tweet on screen, because this is actually the situation. They say today's productivity estimates reveal output per worker growth over a 10-year period, that's a rolling 10-year period, has been weaker in recent quarters than at any point since the mid-1820s. That is a spectacular statistic in and of itself.
It certainly is. I mean, that was, early days of the Industrial Revolution. 1820s, a decade before, takes in the Napoleonic Wars. So, there was kind of unusual factors then affecting the economy. We've not had any huge world wars. We've had, obviously, the interest rates and economic policies that go with that sort of conflict, but without the conflict.
Look, we're gonna come back on this issue of productivity a little bit later. But in the meantime, David, let's talk about the dollar, because Zero Hedge saying that Pakistan is ditching the dollar and trading with China, and I believe RT saying that Pakistan brings the Chinese yuan on par with the US dollar for investment and trade with Beijing. We've got CNBC saying that 3 reasons the world could turn its back on the US dollar. And Business Insider also recognizing this situation with Iran. Clearly America not too happy with Iran for many reasons at the moment, but Iran is ditching the dollar in foreign trade. So where does this leave the global economy if the dollar is ditched, as the mainstream press seems to be pretty determined is happening?
Well, this is extremely significant, and it's one of the stories for 2018 to watch. Now, the Zero Hedge article, it started off looking at a very short-term response, because they point out that Donald Trump, in a tweet, said the following: so that the United States has foolishly given Pakistan more than $33 billion in aid over the last 15 years. And they have given us nothing but lies and deceit, thinking of our leaders as fools. They give safe haven to terrorists we hunt in Afghanistan with little help. No more. So this is Donald Trump explicitly linking foreign policy objectives to the aid budget. Now, that's actually in some ways refreshingly honest, because obviously that is how it works. Remember what the aid budget is a way of taxing poor people in rich countries and giving the money to rich people in poor countries.
Sorry, let me just interrupt there, because this is quite an interesting thing. Over the years, I've been to the States a few times, and what has fascinated me each time I've gone to the States is that I see news stories in the mainstream press in Britain, and then fly across the Atlantic and see similar, not specifically the same news stories, but similar types of news stories in the mainstream press in the United States. Now what we've got is, as we mentioned on the news yesterday, Boris Johnson's now openly linking UK aid with pursuing foreign policy objectives, and what you're saying is that that's exactly what Trump is doing on the other side of the Atlantic. Is there some kind of coordination going on here?
It looks very like it, and it's been striking to see it expressed so plainly. Twice within the same week, when this is for years, for decades, the lie has been that, well, we're only running a foreign aid budget because we're very caring and we're helping these poor countries catch up, and we're helping the poor. Well, it's clearly nothing to do with that. So the Zero Hedge linked the announcement of the Pakistan decision to this tweet by Donald Trump as a response. But that would suggest it's a knee-jerk thing. It would suggest it's a very short-term political response. But in fact, there are much more powerful, longer-term movements going on here. There is a reduction in American power. It's quite striking. Brexit was an example, because Brexit was against the will of the American government. We ignored them. Who cared? Because they didn't have the power to manipulate British public opinion and British political decisions the way they once did. Their power in Europe is clearly waning. The power in the Far East is clearly waning. And the power is based very largely on the dollar and the petrodollar and the ability to direct all trade through the dollar. Now, post-World War II, Bretton Woods, it was linked to gold, but it is no longer. It was linked to gold at $35 an ounce. It's now 1,320, so that's a 98% reduction in the value of the dollar against real hard currency. So you see a crisis over a long term in the dollar value. At some point that can accelerate, at some point quite quickly, that could accelerate to be a real inflationary run in the dollar, and that will be the end of that. So we need to be watching this area very closely during 2018.
Okay, thank you for that. Now let's move on to Brexit, and a number of news outlets. I've chosen Disney News here. A number of news outlets saying that Philip Hammond is stoking, as they've put it, customs union confusion, and this is over the question of whether Britain will remain as part of the single market and the customs union post-Brexit or not, and some people may ask the question, have we left the European Union if we're still part of the customs union and or the single market? And he was speaking to the sorry, I've lost my place here. Do apologise. Sky News here saying that he turned down the chance to rule out an end state in a letter sent in December, but it's only been revealed by a senior Conservative colleague. Now, Nicky Morgan, who herself backed the Remain campaign in the EU referendum, is the chair of the Treasury Select Committee, and she had asked Mr Hammond to explicitly rule out a customs union deal, which he refused to do. David, I have to say, there is no possibility of ruling out a customs union deal because the Northern Irish border pretty much precludes that. So, again, 2018, nothing really has changed. There is no Brexit.
There is no Brexit. There is a set of transitionary rules which amount to essentially colonialism, where we are having our rules set abroad and have no influence whatsoever in them. and there is EU military union proceeding apace, and there is a lot of payments going out from this country to the EU that will cover any money we would have been paying into the EU for several years. And there are German politicians talking about United States of Europe by 2025. So shall we say it's an ongoing fight?
Well, that is a very good point and leads very nicely into the next section, because before Christmas we were talking about the role of Federica Mogherini. Now, she is, of course, second in command in the European Commission to Jean-Claude Juncker, apparently second in command, being vice president, but she's also high representative of the European Union. And we were talking before Christmas about the fact that she is increasingly openly fulfilling a foreign minister's role and touring the world and behaving like a foreign minister. Well, today she is in Cuba meeting Castro, and well, the Cubans delighted to have her there. This is Euronews, and they said the head of the EU's diplomat service has met the president of Cuba at the end of a 2-day visit aimed at strengthening engagement with the communist country. This is their words. State-run television said it covered the favourable state of relations between the EU and Havana. At a press conference earlier in the day, she said the EU countries combined are now Cuba's most important economic partner. She announced a series of agreements. And so it went on. So she was acting all diplomatic and all high-handed. And I do wonder what she's angling herself up for with this move, with these moves towards federalisation of the European Union into one federal superstate. I think Ms. Mogherini sees herself fulfilling a pretty significant role in whatever arrives out of that. She went on to say that the European Union will survive Brexit departure and will remain strong. She said many believe that the referendum in the United Kingdom was going to be the beginning of the end of the European Union. I'm very positive on the fact that the Union is not only going to survive, but it's going to deepen. The world needs the European Union to stay strong, and so this is what we're going to do. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but it's pretty clear that she views herself in a particular way and her role in a particular way, and she's now beginning to project that.
She is, but it's all very vague. I mean, what does strong mean? Well, on an international level, it would normally mean militarily strong and economically strong. Is that where they're planning on taking this? There doesn't. It's all behind closed doors. There is no proper public debate in Europe or out with Europe about what Europe actually is. It's something that's been done to the Europeans and not by them.
Well, that's a very good point. And of course, it is being done behind closed doors. And clearly they have a view of what Europe is and what Europe is to become. They're not discussing it with the public. When the public finally realizes what's going on, that could end pretty badly for them.
It could, but they're in the meantime they'll be manipulating events. Is it really, as it's been portrayed, a terrible accident that the head of Germany opened the floodgates to huge immigration into Europe that's created enormous social strife? Is that really an outpouring of misplaced philanthropy on an international scale, which has backfired? Or is it actually something else? Is it manipulation of the population of Europe to make them do something that they wouldn't otherwise do because, well, they need a little bit of constructive destruction, a little bit of strife to manipulate the opinions?
Well, indeed. Tony Blair said today that if the European Union didn't deal with the migration issue pretty imminently, that's exactly what was going to happen. So you seem to be aligned with our greatest ever leader there, David.
Steady now.
Okay, we'll move on to the Oxford Farming Conference. This has been taking place Wednesday, Thursday, Friday this week. And why are we interested in this? Well, yesterday, Michael Gove was speaking at it. Here he is. Gove's look into the future. And he was basically saying that farmers, he is determined, will get subsidised for turning productive farming land into wildflower meadows and other forests and woods and so on. He said paying landowners for the amount of agricultural land they have is unjust, inefficient, and drives perverse outcomes. It gives the most from the public purse to those who have the most private wealth. After a transition, this is post-Brexit, he means, we will replace the current system with a system of public money for public goods. The principal public good we will invest in is environmental enhancement. The principal public good, in thinking about how better to support farmers in the work of environmental protection and enhancement, it's critical, as everyone in this room, but not everyone outside, appreciates, to recognise that there's no inherent tension between productive farming and care for the natural world. Quite the opposite. I've seen for myself how many of our best farmers, our most productive and progressive farmers, place thoughtful environmental practice and careful husbanding of resources at the heart of their businesses, take the vital question of soil health, minimum or no-till approaches, which require less expenditure on inputs and, of course, keep more carbon in the soil, are both economically more efficient and environmentally progressive. But under the Common Agricultural Policy, farmers are being encouraged to focus on yield overall rather than productivity specifically. This has led to decades of damage in the form of significant and destructive soil erosion, estimated in one study by Cranfield University to cost the economy around £1.2 billion every year. Building on previous countryside stewardship and agri-environmental schemes, we will design a scheme accessible to almost any landowner or manager who wishes to enhance the natural environment by planting woodland, providing new habitats for wildlife, increasing biodiversity, contributing to improved water quality, and returning cultivated land to wildflower meadows or other more natural states. We will also make additional money available for those who wish to collaborate to secure environmental improvements collectively at landscape scale. Now, this is, David, to me, this sounds very much like Agenda 21 in practice. They're now going to fund that. But it concerns me that farmland, which it's taken thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years to develop to a point, is going to be returned, rewilded. And then what happens if that farmland is required? Is it possible, if we rewild farmland on the scale that he's talking about, if he's talking about landscape scale environmental improvements, in inverted commas, how difficult is that? How costly is that going to be? Is it possible for us to actually feed ourselves as a nation? At this point in time, I believe we are not food independent as a nation. So what are your thoughts on this? This seems to be UN policy absolutely being now driven as a result of Brexit, or at least Brexit is providing the excuse. It's being funded direct from government now.
It's a very interesting speech. A couple of things that strike me most forcibly. He said that existing government policy is unjust, inefficient, and drives perverse outcomes. Yes, that's the definition of government policy. That's what it does, because it's central command, it's making decisions for everybody, and it's generally unjust, inefficient, and drives perverse outcomes. Now, what's happening in more and more areas of our public life is this fact is being used to justify the next bit of government intervention. You'll see it in the NHS, you'll see it in the railways. You know, they point to the inefficiency, they point to the perverse outcomes and say, well, something must be done, we must change this. But the thing that is done is more government central control, and it becomes ever more perverse, not less. So that's quite striking, that it's essentially the failure of government regulation of agriculture is being used to justify government regulation of agriculture. Now, when I picked this up on radio, and they were interviewing the head of the National Farmers Union, who was saying something quite different and quite interesting. She was raising the issue of food production, which seems to be omitted entirely from Mr. Gove's speech, and specifically the strategic importance of being able to feed ourselves as an island nation. Now, we were in a situation before in the 1930s and 40s, for example, when it was necessary to bring in large quantities of food by ship, in order to avoid starvation in this country. And that was not strategically very clever. And you back that up against things like EU military union. Well, this is almost as important, because if you are going to maintain your independence in potentially trying circumstances in the future, then you need certain things. You need an army, you need an air force, you need a navy. You also need something to eat. So all of this does seem to have quite long-reaching implications, and ones that are, again, not being discussed. And while, yes, the existing system is inefficient and bizarre, what's being proposed, is it any better?
Well, of course, you only need that level of food production and that level of food security if you have populations at the level they're at the moment. Maybe we're getting a clue there. But I thought it was interesting that he chose to focus on soil health and soil erosion. This, of course, is an issue, but I don't see anything in what he said which improves that situation. But let's go on, because he said a bit more. He discussed public access to farmland. So he said the public access, I know, can be contentious, and I won't get into the weeds of the debate on rights of way at the moment. But the more the public, and especially school children, get to visit, understand and appreciate our countryside, the more I believe they will appreciate, support and champion our farmers. So he's now advocating Open Farm Sunday and other great initiatives like it help reconnect urban dwellers with the earth. They also help secure consent for investment in the countryside, as well as support for British produce. So public access is a public good, so they're going to pay farmers to do that. And then the final one was the final public good, as he described it, was this. But vital as investment in our environment is, it's not the only public good I think we should invest in. On technology, we should build on the innovations pioneered by our superb higher education institutions like Harper Adams University by investing more in automation and machine learning, moving from hands-free hectare to the hands-free farm, with drilling, harvesting, picking and packaging, all automated, precision mapping of every inch under cultivation, and targeted laser treatment of pests and weeds, and highly focused application of any other treatment required. We should invest more in sensor technology that can tell where, when and how livestock should be fed, housed and bred to maximise both yield and individual animal health and welfare. Critical to making this new investment in tech and skills work, of course, is proper infrastructure, super fast broadband and reliable 5G coverage. If I can get reliable and unbroken mobile phone and internet coverage in a tunnel under the Atlantic as I travel between one Faroe Island and the next, I should be able to get it in Oxfordshire, he said. So there you go. That's all about food production as well. David?
Again, we talked earlier about efficiency, right? Now, what efficient productivity, what that requires is the correct investment. Not malinvestment. So you don't want to be investing too early in a sector. You don't want to be investing too much, because there are many demands all across the society. The whole reason, and Mr. Gove claims to know this, the whole reason that you have a free market and free prices and price discovery is so that this information can be communicated to everybody, so that they can coordinate what to do and distribute investment in the most efficient manner possible, not through some sort of central diktat, which is the communist system. Now, there are certain things in the agricultural sector where technology has had huge advantages, and for example, there is a thing called a moo call, and basically you clip it onto your cow, and when the cow goes into labour, the cow sends you a text message to say, I'm going into labour, which farmer friends of mine tell me is an absolute boon, and it's saved many calves' lives, and everything's much easier on the farm because you know when your cow is going into labour. So there's certainly opportunity to use technology. I'm a little bit nervous when government ministers start deciding which technology, how much and when.
Well, those are all good points. My main concern with it, and I'll just reiterate that I'm not a technophobe. I'm enthusiastic to see technology applied in productive ways. But what Gove is saying is, let's remove the farm labouring jobs that exist and replace them with technology. But he's not saying is what's going to happen to those people that have lost their jobs as a result. And David, we've said that his speech, or I've said that his speech reminded me a lot of UN Agenda 21. But another aspect of this, of course, comes back to the to some form of basic income, which is guaranteed by the government. This isn't necessarily a productive way forward, is it?
No, it's the very opposite of productive, and this is sort of saying, well, the government will decide whether you work, and ultimately, if it's a basic income provided by the state, whether you eat. That doesn't sound like a recipe for liberty to me.
No. Okay. Well, let's move on then to the Ban Ki-moon Center, and if we're talking about global agendas, here's another one. This is all about citizenship, I believe.
Yes, thanks to the Scottish National Party deputy leader for pointing me in the direction of this one. He thought this was a wonderful idea. Global citizenship, we are told here, is a continuously evolving concept and mindset that actively supports notions and activities that benefit humankind, not mankind. You can't say mankind anymore because that is sexist. And they go on here and they're describing how they're going to have peace, and we're going to encourage via international education the new mindset to take place. A global citizen, this is what we've all got to be. A global citizen is someone who self-identifies first and foremost, not as a member of a state or tribe or nation or presumably family, though they don't say that, but instead as a member of the human race, looking beyond the narrow scope of national or personal interests. So we're going to overcome the human preference for personal interests. Good luck with that one. Global citizens support peaceful solutions to today's global challenges. So that's good news. So this is another one of these international bodies. It's bypassing governments and bypassing any form of democracy, appealing to what is termed the big society, funded in part by the UN, funded in part by tax-free foundations of the type that are used to shape the public discourse and move politics in the direction desired by people who are not entirely visible to the public. And Ban Ki-moon and the former head of Austria, former president of Austria, are the figureheads. And this is, I think, one to watch. It's brand new, just founded. They're very enthusiastic about all they're going to do. And I think there's going to be quite interesting information coming out from this organisation.
And they have an interesting chief executive who doesn't want to put her photograph on LinkedIn, but principal organisation consultant and contractor. Sorry, political organisation consultant and contractor. Yes, interesting job title.
This is their interim chief executive, is a political organisation consultant and contractor. I thought this was quite a wonderful description, because it is actually honest. It's basically, you give me money and I will give you the political outcomes you desire. And that was refreshingly honest, if nothing else.
Yes. Okay. Well, look, let's come back to the UK and to Grenfell Tower. Now, you have been asking the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea for some information since, I believe, the middle of last year. And they refused to give it to you. So what was the information you were asking for, first of all?
As you know, I'm a professional structural engineer, and I've done quite a number of fire damaged building surveys over the years. And essentially, the common practice is when the fire brigade hands over a scene back to the local authority, if it's a local authority building or if local authority is involved, then they're handing the fire damaged building back to the building owner. Particularly in the case of this local authority, it's normal practice that building owner would then assess the damage. Now, I started to ask in August of last year for a copy of the structural engineer's report on Grenfell. Now, they had a huge number of people go into this building and sift through the wreckage. They had all the people doing the forensic work, recovering remains and such like. Plus, they had the people in the area round about. If the building, and it was a very large fire, as everyone saw, if the building had been seriously weakened, there were major health and safety concerns, both for the surrounding people and for the people that the council contracted and put into that environment. So I thought there must be a structural engineer's report. So I asked for it. in August, and no response, no response. And then eventually said, well, we're treating it as an environmental request, so you'll get a response in October. No response, no response. I took it up with the Information Commissioner, who found in my favour.
Well, here is the response from the Information Commissioner, and it says on page 2, the Commissioner's decision is that the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea has breached Regulation 5(2) of the Environmental Information Regulations 2004 by failing to respond to this request.
So they gave them, what was it now, 53 days or something. There was 58 days. There was a specific amount of time they had to answer. And this expired on the 28th of December. So the 28th of December came and went. The implication is that they're essentially in contempt of court situation at that point. But on the 29th at 6:15 in the evening, I got a response from the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea.
And it says, I'm responding to your request under the Freedom of Information Act 2000, which we received on the 14th of July 2017 for information held by the Council. Your request is as follows. Please provide a copy of the structural engineer's report or the information contained therein on Grenfell Tower in its current fire damaged condition. At the time of your request, a full structural survey of Grenfell Tower had yet to be conducted. Therefore, the information is not held. Grenfell Tower is currently under the jurisdiction of the coroner and police while the investigation is ongoing. Following the establishment of the Grenfell Tower response team, Michael Lockwood, and the Chief Executive of Harrow Council, has been managing the Grenfell Tower site. Waits is the primary contractor under the Dangerous Structures Consortium of London Boroughs and was appointed under the Dangerous Structures Emergency Works Framework Agreement. A full structural survey is in the process of being completed. So what they have said is that a structural survey, they haven't done one, but they're saying that it's not our problem, Gov, because all these other people have jurisdiction over the building. And a full structural survey is in the process of being completed, so they're admitting that for the last 6 months, people have been working quite happily in that building with no idea of whether that building was safe or not. So where's the health and safety in that? And so that's a pretty spectacular position to be taking. But the other question that has to be asked then, David, is why didn't they just simply give you this response within the 20 days allowed by the Freedom of Information Act back in July, August?
Yes, absolutely. There's really two possible explanations here. Either they're not telling me the truth, and I do find it a little surprising that they restate my question in slightly different terms, and they're talking about there's no full structural engineer's report. That word wasn't in my original request, and I just wonder whether that's being used to hide some information. I'm not entirely clear. But if really there's no structural assessment of that building, then that's gross negligence. That's gross negligence that could easily be of a criminal standard. There was huge numbers of people put at risk if that's the case.
You could say that what happened with the fire in the first place was gross negligence, and that there should be criminal investigation. Well, they're looking at criminal investigations there, but this is compounding that. Is basically what you're saying.
Yes, I mean it's simply we have a concrete building. Okay, it's a concrete building of a type, high rise, etc. We know has suffered similar types of structures have suffered progressive collapse or large collapse from small original sources in the past, but the whole building was engulfed in fire, so that will have weakened it to some extent. To what extent? At some point, an assessment by a properly trained, competent structural engineer has to be carried out before you start putting dozens and dozens of people inside the building as to whether the building's safe. It's so fundamental, it almost doesn't bear saying. And they're now saying to me that was not done. I just find it incredible.
Well, yeah, indeed, they're saying it was not done. They're saying it's only in progress now. So that they have admitted, effectively, you're suggesting to a criminal act. Is that too strong?
Well, no, it might not be because I think that it's gross negligence, and gross negligence is a criminal threshold here. If they're putting people in and around that building at risk, having had however many months now, 7, 8 months since the fire, and no assessment as the building's safety. It's beyond belief.
Yeah. Well, in the meantime, the Metropolitan Police, of course, in charge of the criminal investigation and so on, they're now complaining that they need more money. They're asking for £38 million from central government for their criminal investigation. The finance chief, Linda McMullen, said, we have also indicated that we estimate that we will be spending close to £27 million on this particular investigation. That's on top of £11.1 million to do with the incident. She said that we're asking whether or not we can have dispensation, not just simply the 1% reference, but also want to claim the full cost of officer time for that investigation, not just the additional overtime. She said, we don't think it would be reasonable for us to pick up the full costs, as we know the investigation will go on for some time. But correct me if I'm wrong, it's their job.
Yes, indeed. I mean, how can they be claiming monetary constraints at this point? It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay, let's have a look at briefly some Scottish news and the rather devastating news that Iron Brew is having its recipe changed. Now, for anybody that has never been to Scotland, that doesn't know what Iron Brew is, it is the national drink. It's even more important than Scots whisky, I would suggest, David. And well, they're removing most of the sugar out of it, or at least half the sugar out of it.
This is a national disaster. There are only 2 places in the world where Coca-Cola, the American product, is not the #1 selling soft drink. Peru, which has got its own product called, I've got here, Inca Cola, and I'm just reading that this was created by a British immigrant, Joseph Robinson Lindley, and it marginally outsells the American product. And of course, Scotland, where Iron Brew leaves Coca-Cola in a distant second place and is a source of national pride and weight gain. And, well, we're not allowed to have these decisions made by individual people anymore. The state is stepping in. We have the sugar tax coming, thanks to the UK government. It's encouraged, of course, by the Scottish government because they want us all to be slimmer. So they're taking out sugar and they're putting in things which are much worse.
Well, indeed. So we're being a little bit lighthearted about this, but the fact is they're replacing the sugar with aspartame, which many people suggest is even more damaging to health than sugar. So this is not a step forward.
It's not a step forward. Moves like this have not done anything to tackle obesity, sometimes making it worse. Certainly not being any sort of health generator, quite the reverse. Major concerns over the safety of these products still remain, and questions over how they were ever approved by the Federal Drug Agency in America in the first place. And this is what we're going to be forced by the state. It's not a choice that we'll make as consumers. No, taxation has been used as a weapon to change the free choice of producers and consumers, and to conform to an agenda which, again, we don't really understand what it is, but we don't agree with it, but we're getting it nonetheless. I would rather hope that Iron Brew would think again. They were once threatened with prosecution for the name of the company, the name of the product, because it used to be spelled iron, B-R-E-W, and the state said, no, you can't call it a brew because it's not technically brewed. So they just changed the spelling and ignored them. And that was the right attitude. I hope they've still got that sort of spirit, and they'll continue to produce their original one, and I'm sure many people in Scotland would be happy to pay a little bit extra.
Now, just very quickly, Scottish Police in the news once again. This is the Scotsman Assistant Chief Constable Bernard Higgins, subject to formal probe. What's behind this?
Yeah, we covered this before Christmas. Bernard Higgins is associated with firearms and the misuse of police fire ranges and information being published on social media that rather suggested that people were going down for jollies at the police firing range, and reenacting scenes from Lethal Weapon. This doesn't seem to be appropriate, and Mr. Higgins is suspended while this is investigated. The summary here being that it seems to be more serious than formally advised, and that this investigation is getting fully underway. So we'll watch that one carefully. This is one of the top 5 or 6 officers in Police Scotland. Of course, the top man is currently suspended, and the second in command is Mr. Livingston, and maybe more on him later.
Okay, and another one from Peter Kirby. We are featuring Peter Kirby's coverage of Scottish affairs quite a lot, and deservedly so. And the headline on this one is Wolf Court, Lord Advocate James Wolfe and his judge wife at the centre of £9 million damages claim. Questions remain why Lady Wolfe avoided recusal during emergency judge swap on court case against her own husband. Did she seriously attempt to sit as a judge with her husband in the dock?
So it would seem. Peter Kirby, as you say, is like Irn-Bru, is a Scottish national treasure, and we know an awful lot more about our society because of the work he's done. This particular case, they've now had 4 judges in this case. Lady Wolfe was removed from the hearing, but with no official comment from Justice Scotland, no official recusal either. She was replaced by Lady Morag Wise QC, who was replaced by Lord Paul Arthurson QC, who was replaced by Lord Sidney Neil Brailsford. So we're on judge number 4. The case itself is extremely important. Lord Brailsford says, quote, "I acknowledge that this is a very serious litigation relating to matters of substance. Those matters of substance are whether the Lord Advocate in Scotland is immune to prosecution. The basic case that's been brought by Mr. Whitehouse is that the Lord Advocate and Police Scotland and the Crown Office carried out basically unlawful actions against him, detained him without cause, put an indictment forward without any evidential basis, and he's claiming for very substantial damages of some 9 million. And yes, the Lord Advocate personally is one of those who are defending the case. The Lord Advocate's position is that he's immune from prosecution no matter what he does. Well, we'll see.
Okay, well, look, we're going to end with Edward Heath again. But now, of course, the Edward Heath investigation is kind of out of the news, out of the mainstream news post-New Year. But this sort of came to your attention. We just wanted to highlight it. So if we go back over the last few months of 2017 and look at some of the mainstream coverage of the Edward Heath alleged paedophile allegations case and the investigation into that. Here's a headline from the Times. Edward Heath case was a shambles right from the start. We've got ITV News here. Some of the evidence in paedophile allegations inquiry into Sir Edward Heath. Fantastical, criminologist says. Then we've got the Telegraph. Police accused of wriggling at every single turn after having to release only 2 arrested during Edward Heath inquiry. Well, perhaps we get a bit more of a clue from BBC iPlayer here, because this is a radio programme from Radio 4. Criminologist Richard Hoskins, no credible evidence in Ed Heath allegations. And what's common between all those articles and much of the other mainstream coverage of this, David, is that it all seems to come from one person, Richard Hoskins.
Yes, it's remarkable that you've got one person who's claimed to be an expert, a criminologist, and given very high billing by all of the press, but there's only one expert, there's only one person putting forward this narrative that there's nothing to see here, move along.
So this is him, but what is he? What qualifies him as a criminologist? Because well, this is his book, The Boy in the River. So who is he?
It's a very strange CV. He was briefly in the British Army in a short-term commission. He then went for a year's break in his early 20s to Africa, stayed 6 years, came back and then studied theology at Oxford. I think it was certainly one of Oxford or Cambridge. I think it was Oxford, and then was involved in this case with the Boy in the River, which is a ritual killing. Has built himself up into this view that he's a criminologist. There doesn't seem to be an awful lot substantial there. Claims to be an expert on ritual abuse, but by the way, Satanist ritual abuse in his view doesn't seem to exist. It's all recovered memory. So another one of these experts in a thing that they don't believe exists. It's very common in Britain. We see that quite a lot. And as well as a criminologist, also a fiction author and crime writer. So we're not quite sure what he is. And I say he because even that is not so clear.
So we're not quite sure what he is, but it seems he's not quite sure what he is either.
Yes, because for a while he was Rachel. He was Richard, and then he was Rachel Hoskins, and now he's Richard Hoskins again.
Right, and but he seems to be quite happy to write on these issues. So.
And yes, and he's here talking about, so he's taking a very sort of postmodern, which is there's no right and wrong, you don't really know anything for sure, viewpoint here. So it's a very postmodern political agenda. He's talking here about gender, and he said, gender, just to summarise his views here, gender is complex. It's certainly more complex than the simplistic male or female designations. It's about time the West bucked up its ideas about this. I would like to see Britain lead the way by adopting a trans category for those who identify somewhere between male and female. Alternatively, why don't we just do away with gender categories? Why do we need them anyway? It doesn't matter. So again, he's taking a very postmodern, hard left, politically correct view of things. It's very ideologically driven. It's very politically driven. And this is the one person without any criticism, without any review of his views, without any context, that the press in this country have for months been relying wholly on to criticise Mike Veal and the Heath investigation. And it's another example of the state and the establishment needs a bodyguard of intellectuals to provide some sort of intellectual cover for how they conduct themselves. And I think this is an example of a situation where they're very thin on cover, and this is the person they've selected to put their ideas forward.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we're absolutely out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us today, David, and thank you for joining us. Hopefully we will see you again, as usual, at 1 p.m. on Monday. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.